Welcome back to Fireside Chats. It's week number 20. Somehow we made it, and we are here tonight with Grandma in the winter season, all 70 degrees of it. And our first question comes from maybe areas that are colder, because we're going to ask Grandma about getting her first and only fur coat.
Well, that was quite a surprise because Grandpa Stan was overseas in the war zone, and Christmas I probably was over at my mother's house, and I went over to his mother's house, and there was a big box in his mother's house, and I opened it, and it was a fur coat with great silver fox tails, and I think it must have cost around $200. Well, Stan had sent his mother the money and told her to buy me a fur coat. And I was so surprised. I do have a photo, maybe Peter can find it to show you. Me in that fur coat on Christmas morning and the next day, turning around so everybody can see it in the back. And that was a very complete surprise. I never expected to have a fur coat in my life. But he told his mother to go and buy me one, and she did. So I felt very classy wearing a fur coat.
Were you the talk of the town? Was everybody commenting on your fur coat?
I guess so, in a way. But people didn't make that much of it. It wasn't that cold in California, so I really didn't wear it that much. Of course, he was gone, so where would I go in a fur coat? I'd wear it maybe it was a real cold Sunday and go to church in it. That was about the most of it. So I never know what ever happened to it. I sort of feel eventually it ended up at Mammoth in one of those trunks, and as they got older, we used it as part of a cover when it would get real cold at Mammoth. So.
Also, during this time of year, people do a lot of shopping and they spend a lot of money, and things are a little bit more expensive than they were when you were growing up. And I think people are probably interested in how much you remember things costing, maybe the price of gas, milk, eggs.
Well, 29 cents strikes a bell for a gallon of gas to me. Seemed to me, I can remember that.
They're giving it away.
And everything was, of course, much cheaper. And as I told Peter, maybe he can, John and Mark on our 50th wedding had a Safeway advertisement with the different ad telling them the price of milk and different things. And I think milk used to be, trying to remember, 25 cents a quart, something like that. And of course, sugar, 5 pounds of sugar might be 50 cents or 25 cents. But yet, when you only made a good salary was $25 a week, that was really rich. So comparatively, prices are much cheaper. And a loaf of bread used to be 10, 15 cents. Well, Monday taught me how to bake bread. I could make it for maybe 6 or 8 cents. So after the war, I continued baking bread much cheaper with all the kids. Bread you could always fill them up on. So the price of groceries and everything was very, very small, but not compared to the salary. So comparatively, if you actually made $25 a week, that was a good salary. After the war, because they needed to build homes, they didn't build any during the war, we paid $2,800 for our first little 20 by 20 house with a big lot at the end of town on 99th Street. My sister and her husband bought a house brand new. It took them a while to get it. I think it was $6,000. Well, that was a lot of money for our house in those days. Just compare what it is today. It just had the living room, sort of a long living room, dining room, tiny, tiny kitchen. I stand at the sink and I turned left and there was a stove. I turned right and there was the Frigidaire. Then I turned all the way around and Stan had put a board up on the other wall and put a stick under it so we could sit the Louie and Bruce on high chairs or little chairs in front of it for a table. But we mainly ate in the living room, dining room. And then we had a tiny one bedroom. You had to practically step over the end of the bed to get in the bathroom door. That's how tiny the room was. I guess it must have been about 8 by 6 bedroom in the tiny bathroom. And then there was a back porch, and Shannon closed it. And that's where he built the bunk beds for Louie and Bruce to sleep on. But the house had a great big yard. So we had chickens in the back of it, and Stan put a swing on one of the trees. And so we were so happy to be there and in our own home. And then when Craig came, well, it was getting a little tight. So then we looked for a bigger home, and we bought a house that had moved. They moved there from somewhere. It was on a corner lot, and I think it was about $4,800. But it had a big living room, 2 bedrooms downstairs, and then a big sort of loft going up the stairs in the back where the boys. Well, Stan's first car, when he got his scholarship to Loyola, he had 300 or something in the bank back in Colorado. So he wrote his mother and he said, "Send me the money in my bank account because I think I could get a job if I have a car." So she sent him the money, and he got a used car. I think it was a 38 or a 36 Ford. And that way he got a job at the flour mill in the summer and on weekends. So he could work throwing those big sacks of grain around. It's got him in shape for football season. So that was his first car, which he took me out in 3 years of dating. And we still have it when he went off to war. And finally, during the war, gas rationing and everything, I couldn't, I can't remember when it happened. I think I finally had to sell it because I couldn't, for some reason.
Do you remember how much you sold it for?
Wasn't very much. It might have been $300 or something. Because cars are, yeah, I can't, or whether it just went kaplooey. I can't remember really what happened to it. And then when he came home, well, the last time he had to go overseas, we were back east, and one of his motor mechanics said, "Well, Skipper," he said, "I have this car," and we were thinking how to get back to California for Christmas before he went overseas again. He says, "I have this car, it's a 39 Ford." And so he sold it to Stan and I, and we drove back across country and spent Christmas with his folks. And then he went overseas, was put in charge of a group of men, and back on the big ship going back through Hawaii and back to the Philippines. And he was gone from Christmas after, 1945 January until the war ended in August. And then when he came home, I still had the 39 Ford then, of course. And that was our car until, which I can remember trying to start it, and it wouldn't start, and he'd be pushing on the back, and he'd say, "Give it the gas, give it the gas." And I would kill the engine, because you had to shift out in the gears. It wasn't like automatic like now. And Bruce can remember both of us going in the house just sort of, we've had it. Couldn't get the car started. Then he'd finally get a neighbor and work on it, and they'd get the car started. So we had that car until about 1950. And that Christmas, his dad and mom gave us a present of a brand new 1950 Ford. So that was quite a gift from his folks. But it was good because they couldn't drive in LA. It was too busy for them. And we were always taking places anyhow. So that was our first new car, a 50 Ford, that his folks gave it to us. And I think that probably cost around, probably around $1,000, if it was that much.
Do you remember the cost of something like an ice cream cone when you were a kid?
Nickel. And we'd go to the beach and I was always looking for milk bottles because you got 2 cents a milk bottle and you turn them over. And I was always looking for those. If I could get 10 pennies or 15, I could go to the movie on Saturday for 10 cents and then have 5 pennies to buy Jawbreakers or a candy bar or something like that. We usually bought Jawbreakers because they lasted a long time. They were a big round candy ball. You just sucked on them forever. Suckers were 2 cents or a penny or something like that.
So we move into the future, reflecting on the past. You visited Wales, your cousin in Wales. Tell us about that adventure with Grandpa.
It was a cousin of Stan's mother's dad, I'm sure, that she told us about when we took our England trip. I think it was in the 90s, I'm not sure. And we were on a tour, and so to go to Cardiff, we had to leave the tour for a couple days. And the tour left us in Cardiff, Wales. And then the policeman came and knocked at the door. And this cousin named Glenn, I think his name, said, welcomed us like we were old friends. Oh, Connie, how are you? And Stanley, and we'd never known him in our lives. Very nice gentleman. And they put us in their car. Of course, Stan went around on they stood on the right side to drive. Well, he went on the right side. No, you have to sit on the left side. Mixed a little mix up there. And took us to their home, and we spent the night there with them, visiting with them. It was very nice, and they lived right on a river. I can't think of the name of the town, but it was a small town near Cardiff. And so we got to know them. They were very jolly people. And then the next day they took us back to the train to get back to England or London. And so I still write to them and send them a Christmas card, but I haven't heard in the last couple of years, and I'm sure they've passed on. But they have the Welsh accent is a lot like the Irish accent, and they were very lovely people. And Stan and I enjoyed it very much, meeting them. We didn't get to hear any Welsh singers like Mumsy did when she went, because they weren't in town that time, but I'd love to have done that. But we got on the train and went back, rejoined our tour group in England. Look out their porch and see the river flowing, and that was quite interesting, seeing that. In California, you don't see too, unless you live in Sacramento or someplace, you're not going to see a river at your back door.